Greetings, wise viewers. Welcome back to our journey through the mystical world of SAP Basis transactions. In this second part, we shall delve deeper into the arcane secrets of SAP Basis, revealing the powerful spells that every administrator must master.
Hit the like button, and let's start the second part of our guessing game.
The first category for today, security.
In what transaction can you manage certificates?
Encryption is a must today, so everyone needs to know this S-Trust transaction. It allows you to manage system certificates and build a trust relationship based on certificate lists. We've already discussed this a bit on the channel, but we'll probably come back to it in the future. Question for you. What transaction allows you to create an access list for incoming encrypted RFC connections?
It's all about SNC0. When some system tries to connect to ours and identifies itself with some certificate, then its SNC string is verified against the access control list created in this transaction. Your turn. What transaction is used to manage RFC connection password encryption keys, among others?
It's simple. Sextor. But I'm not going to tell you about this transaction right now, because there was already an episode devoted entirely to it on the channel. It's worth returning to it. And by the way, click the subscribe button. Let's change the category to a related one. Security audit. And immediately a question for you. What transaction manages the collection of audit data?
I remember that there was a transaction SM19, but this is deprecated and replaced by a new mechanism. In fact, so is another transaction. SM20 is used to find and view security audit logs. Both transactions are worth knowing, as they are used on older systems. And do you know their newer equivalents?
Yes, RSAU config is used to configure security audit. Here you can set dynamic and static filters based on which audit events will be recorded in the logs. An important option of the new transaction is the ability to choose where the logs are saved. The choices are now disk or database, or both at the same time. The second transaction is RSAU, read log. It is the equivalent of the old SM20 and allows you to read logs as the name suggests. I think that's all that's worth pointing out in this category. We have another related one, authentication and single sign-on. And the question for you is as follows. What transaction allows you to easily configure SSO using certificates or Kerberos?
SNC Wizard transaction, known as SAP Single Sign-On Wizard. If anyone is interested in details, more information can be found in the SSO video. There we present the full configuration, including SNC Wizard Run. Please tell me if you know of a transaction that allows you to configure authentication when logging in via HTTPS based on SAML 2.0 protocol.
Yes, I know. It's a SAML2 transaction. But unfortunately, my system is not configured for it, so you'll have to take my word for it.
Okay. Are these all the basic authentication transactions?
Not all, but the basic ones. But I think sufficient for our short list of 100 transactions. Let's change the category to transport management. The first question for you, what is the most important transaction in this area?
For me, without a doubt, STMS. It's a transaction for configuration as well as queue management. We use it to move or monitor transports between systems. Question for you. What transaction will you use to check the status and contents of a particular user's transport requests?
The easiest way to do this is to use the SE09 transaction. The user field contains my name, so I can display my transports. There is only one in modifiable status. It contains 2 tasks. On the other hand, from several different transactions, I always prefer SE01, which groups the functionality of a couple of other programs. In the tabs at the top, I can choose what interests me. Having the request number, I can view the status and contents of the transport in the first tab, but also the logs. For example, the second tab contains what SE09. So I use SE01 most often, because it is universal. And what transaction is the transport administrator's toolbox?
You can find most useful little tools in SE03. I mostly use this transaction to find requests where specific objects are located. Usually when I want to know how a given object arrived to a system, but of course, there are many more options.
Okay, let's leave the topic of transports and move on to the next section, spool and printing.
What transaction is the configuration center for this unit?
Without any hesitation, SPAD. When I enter this transaction, I initially see only basic options. That's why I usually click full administration right away. New tabs like device types appear. But let's see the most popular function, output devices. I only have one printer here, and it's not really working, but it won't stop me from printing this list. What's more, I choose this particular printer as the output device. I select to print immediately to generate an output request, not just a spool request. And a question for you. What transaction allows you to check your printouts?
If it is only about my prints, then SP02. Here's the list. I can find various details on it, including status. 2 of them are pending. 1 is a spool entry without output request.
And what if we wanted to see the printouts of all users?
Then I will use a very similar transaction, SP01. I have 2 tabs here, spool requests and output request. I am interested in all requests, so I choose the first tab. In the place of user, I specify an asterisk to see the documents of all users. Today, there was only 1 printout, so I will change the date range. I don't expect much on the sandbox. There are 4 requests belonging to 2 users, to me and to you. 3 of them are output requests because they have status. Now, a practical question from me. Basis sometimes needs to diagnose problems related to a large number of spool requests. What is the easiest way to see who is producing the most of them, or for which printer?
The answer is spool overview, SPOV. I really like this transaction because it is very clear. It shows a neat summary. I can see that I have 3 prints active in the system but not completed. The total of spool requests is more than 2,000. But I know that they come from jobs. I can see what users are responsible for output requests. I have more options. Here, you can see the printouts by printer name. Of course, in such a small system, statistics are boring. But if you have more users and printers, you will find a lot of interesting information here. Enough about printing. The next category, performance. And a question. Where is the best place to check statistics on individual transactions, servers, types of processes, with a breakdown of the various stages of the dialog step execution?
The closest to this description is ST03. It is important for this transaction to have the necessary data collected and aggregated. Here you have very different profiles according to which you can conduct various analyses. You can spend long hours here and not get bored.
Yes. This transaction is very useful in analyzing system usage and detecting problems at the statistical level. You can also observe the degradation or improvement of execution times after various changes to programs, or the system configuration.
Okay, question. What is related to performance and memory at the same time? And in what transaction can we track this?
Buffers. Let's move to transaction ST02. SAP is rich with a diversity of buffers and types of memory. This is such a broad topic that it probably deserves a separate episode. This transaction is worth looking into to see if there are any buffering problems in the system, often manifested by a large number of swaps. Of course, you should be aware that swaps are a natural part of the cache mechanism. But when some red warning appears, it's worth doing a deeper analysis of whether this is expected for some reason, acceptable, or whether you need to consider increasing buffers. This transaction really provides a lot of useful data. It's worth visiting the Detail Analysis menu, where we have sections for deeper analysis of specific buffer types. Question for you. Where is the best place to check operating system performance?
Probably the best transaction is ST06. Here you have various metrics for CPU, memory, disk, network, or processes. Everything you need. What about database monitoring?
Transaction Database Performance Monitor is ST04. Here you have a basic overview, but also performance metrics. Very informative. And what transaction will you use, as you want to check the network latency by ping tool?
There is a dedicated transaction for this, OS01. I can choose which destination address I want to test: presentation, application, database, or any address. I choose application server, 10 ICMP packets, and select my server. I need to wait to finalize the test. It takes a while, and I get very clear statistics. I have a more difficult puzzle for you. What performance metric is often used as a server performance summary, but is very much misunderstood?
I think I know what you mean. Let's go to the SMLG transaction. This is a transaction for defining logon groups, but we can go to load distribution. Here, for each server, we have a metric of average response time. With a large number of dialog steps and a variety of activities on the system, this allows us to estimate the differences between servers quite well. And based on this, the best candidate for logging in new users is also selected. So it's not surprising that companies often evaluate the health of the system based on this one parameter. However, this is often incorrect. When there is not much going on in the system and users are using so-called heavy transactions with long dialog steps, this time can increase. And it has nothing to do with server performance, just the specifics of the load.
That is true. This is a common problem.
Load distribution is part of CCMS. But where can we find CCMS monitor sets?
You can find them, for example, using RZ20 transaction.
Okay, that's enough for me. Performance and monitoring transactions are very often useful in diagnosing problems. Let's consider what else might be useful. New category, troubleshooting. First question: how to quickly check if the system is healthy?
Playing on words, the sick transaction. Here, you can find quick information about severe configuration issues. And what about so-called dumps?
ST22 transaction is used to check runtime errors. There are currently no errors on my small system, but this is where we start troubleshooting very often. The entries that appear here may be related to various areas of the system. They can be linked to technical problems, development bugs, bad configuration, but also incorrect use of various programs. And a question for you: how to read the system log?
Transaction SM21 is a report where you can find the entire list of system log entries. Errors, but of course not only, simply messages. Next question. Update requests are an important part of data processing. How do you verify that everything is in order in this area?
I use transaction SM13. I can verify that update is active. In addition, I can run the report and see if any entries are waiting in the queue or if there were update errors. And what can you tell me about locks?
Two main transactions come to my mind. The first is SM12. I am checking if there are any locks in the system for any user. Empty. Well, nothing is happening in the system. The second transaction that is relevant is SMENQ. I could see the same thing as in SM12, but I switched to server administration. At first I see an overview, but in the menu on the left I have all the options related to the lock server you can imagine. For example, I can view the profile parameters associated with it. And now I have a slightly different question. Often when we conduct an investigation related to the malfunctioning of programs, we go a bit beyond Basis. Sometimes we want to analyze code of some ABAP program. What transaction would you use then?
Also, I find two possible transactions. The first is more complex and is the SE80. What makes this transaction special from the Basis point of view is the advanced options for searching the code we are interested in. Repository browser. But when I want to take a quick look at a well-known program, I rather use SE38. I type in the name of the report, for example user lists, and display. Simple and fast. Next question for you. Let's assume you have a Fiori. What transaction will you use to see gateway errors?
The names of these transactions are somewhat difficult to remember, but logical in structure. IWFND error log. Here it is empty again, because it is a barely used system. Question: If you were to show a transaction to check work process logs with this, what would you point to?
The fastest way is ST11. Here you have a list of all log files. You can view any of them. And where would you check logs that do not belong to Basis?
You probably mean application logs. In that case, SLG1. Although they do not actually belong to Basis, they do help in analyzing user tickets. We look here often to correlate the timing of application and technical problems.
Okay, let's stay close to the troubleshooting topic, but change the category to a specific one. Trace.
I'm the one with the first question. What transaction is responsible for the system trace?
ST01 is perhaps the most classic transaction related to tracing, very often used by the authorization team. But here we have a rich selection of components that can be traced. So Basis will find something to like here too, although we use a different transaction a lot more often. Do you know which one?
Of course, ST05, performance trace. Also a classic transaction, but focused on performance and components that Basis is most interested in. Of course, we use it not only when we are concerned with performance, sometimes to see what operations are performed during user activity. And what transaction for tracing do you use most often?
I use ST12. Unfortunately, I can't show it on this system. It is a much more modern, richer, and more convenient transaction for tracing.
Okay, I believe you. What is the next category?
Essential part of each SAP system. Database. What do you think is the most fundamental transaction related to the database?
I mostly use DB02. Such a habit because many T codes take you to the same program, just different tabs. This is a basic set of tools related to administration, analysis, and troubleshooting of everything related to the system database. Here you can find virtually any information that a Basis administrator might need, and it's worth looking here regularly. And what other shortcuts to this transaction do you remember?
It's been a long time since I remembered DB13 well, and that's DBA planning calendar. In an age of increasing autonomy and automation of administrative tasks in databases, this is less and less useful. But sometimes it can still be helpful. Another shortcut is DB12, which is more useful. This is the fastest way to see what the status of database backups and transaction logs are. These transactions are about the connection to the main database of the SAP system. What if you want to check what databases the system is connected to in addition?
The answer is transaction DBCO. Here I can define a new connection to another database. Although this system is S/4HANA, the connections are not limited to HANA. Of course, in the operation system, I must have the appropriate drivers. And what transaction is still most commonly associated with viewing table contents?
Undoubtedly SE16. This is a very common transaction, a very classic one. Let's take a look at the USR02 table, which stores data about the users of the system. I have the option to enter filters. I execute the report, and I can already see the contents. Simple and fast. And what if you are more interested in the structure and settings, and not the content of the table?
I would use SE11. This transaction allows you to not only check the fields, keys, or indexes of the table, but also a great variety of technical settings, such as the table class in the system or buffering. Question for you. What if you wanted to view the contents of a table or tables based on selected layouts, let's say in kind of a simple reporting system?
There is such a thing as SQVI, Quick Viewer. It is indeed a kind of simple reporting system. I have a test query defined here for the USR02 table, and it works great. Only the data I defined earlier is displayed, but I think it's time to change the category. The next one is Files. And the question is, what transaction allows you to browse SAP-related directories, but also files?
The most fundamental transaction in this category, AL11. I see a list of all defined SAP directories. For example, I pick DR profiles, containing, as you can easily guess, system profiles. I click on the default profile and can view it. like almost any other text file. Now, maybe a slightly different question. And what transaction is most closely related to files because of its name?
The closest one? Certainly file. This is a system-wide transaction. Very useful. It implements a layer of abstraction when defining path and file names. Not only is it a convenience for organizing file management, but it has another background. SAP is a multi-platform system, and there are even cases of heterogeneous landscapes, and each operating system has slightly different restrictions on naming files and paths. Now, admittedly, the restrictions are smaller, but historically it was an actually critical thing. Today, we most often simply focus on mapping logical paths to physical ones, but this was not always the case. Maybe one more question in this category. Where do you define operating system commands?
Indeed, it has something to do with the files. The answer is transaction SM69. Here, I have a list of all commands defined for different operating systems. You can also define your own. At the end, there is, for example, zsleep. It calls a script on the operating system. I can execute it or schedule it as a job. The command can also be called by a developer from a program.
Okay, we've got almost 100, and no transaction set can be without this category: installation and updates.
Oh yes, two somewhat strangely named transactions. Which one comes first? The holy one?
My guess is that it is about Saint. It simply abbreviates SAP Add-on Installation Tool. And what other hilarious name are you referring to?
The second one makes me think of Monty Python. No, not with that programming language. Spam, 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 spam. I know it's just a support package manager, but it sounds weird. In this transaction, we install patches to the system, specifically sets of them. Support packages. We have 100. We made it. Are we finishing?
We could, but everyone is already asleep anyway. Let's add some bonus ones. No one will know.
Okie dokie.
Tell me, how do you upload smaller patches?
With S-Note. Note Assistant. This is simple. And what two transactions are inseparably connected with the update process? They are not part of Basis, but it is useful to know them to understand the process.
It's true, they are worth knowing. The first of these is SPAU. It is used by developers when they need to adjust objects such as programs, reports, modules, or screens, because the previously modified version is different from the latest one. The second, and perhaps it should be the first, is even more important. SPDD refers to the modification of change data directory objects. SPDD is the essential phase of any upgrade. And tell me, without what we can't start the upgrade?
Without a maintenance license. So transaction S license, right?
Bingo! I guess that now we can consider that we have it all. Let's finish here.
Great, because it was really such a long game.
Yes, it was. I guess all that's left now is to thank everyone for watching to the end. At least if anyone actually made it to the end. We encourage you to watch the other videos on the channel. If you know someone who is learning Basis, or is already advanced and wants to expand his knowledge, send him a link to this channel. Or just subscribe to the channel and give us a like.
And if you think a transaction is missing, leave it in the comments for the others. Or better, name your favorite or the most useful Basis transaction.
May your magic of 104 Basis spells always be effective in solving problems. See you next time.